Tonight, I have 6 alien, UFO, and abduction stories for you. Try not to get too creeped out and enjoy the stories.
I've seen bright lights in the sky for as long as I could remember. I remember being really little and looking out my window and seeing a light shining into my room. The next thing I remember was being in my bed as this, what I can only recall as a translucent being entering my room. It resembled that of a person that had a static electricity looking outline. Do you know those white body outlines you see in a crime scene where there was a homicide committed? Kind of like that, except instead of a white line, it looked just like electricity. I don't remember ever feeling fear. I do remember feeling paralysis, and the air was full and thick with static, just like how you would feel when a thunderstorm approaches. I remember this being approaching me while I was in bed and raising its arm. The very next thing I remember is being on some sort of table-like structure surrounded by these same beings. I couldn't really tell you where I was because, quite frankly, I don't know. Again, my memory is very fuzzy about the whole situation. I remember waking back up in my bed. I felt like a part of me was missing. Something wasn't right. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. This happened when I was only 7 years old. These same lights would appear on and off outside for years to come. I grew up in the same house I was brought home from the hospital. I moved out when I was 19 and haven't dealt with any of the same experiences with the lights since. However, since that one night, I felt that I've needed therapy because it's damaged me so much emotionally. I don't know if what was done to me was so traumatic that my brain had blocked it out. All I know is I still feel empty. I feel total despair. Something was taken from me that I can never get back. I wish I knew what it was. I know it might sound crazy to some, but I'm sure there's got to be someone else out there that's experienced something similar. Thank you for hearing me out. This story took place in 2009. I was only 21 at the time and had just begun a drinking binge with my other slightly underage friends. We were all having a great drunken night on Lake Okeechobee in Florida and having the time of our lives. I've gone to this lake before, so I was familiar with the area. My brother was with us, so he was the designated driver, and as you guessed, he wasn't indulging in drinks. We weren't planning on staying all night, no, just until it got late enough to where my brother couldn't stay up anymore. We were having a great time drinking and hanging out by the lake when I remember being so involved in conversation that I didn't even notice this bright blue light that appeared right above us. All of my friends dropped their beers in unison, what seemed, with their mouths open. Even my brother was freaking out. We all looked up and just saw this bright orb emitting this incredible bright blue light. It wasn't a defined orb per se, only glowing, just a glowing ball of light. It hovered about 50 feet above us, only momentarily, and then flew around the lake after that. It went in all sorts of directions until finally flying off in the night sky. It would radiate bright and dim down at all sorts of uneven intervals of time. The light, however, emitted from it was extremely bright still. We were scared, but at the same time, I thought we were all tripping balls until my sober brother mentioned that he had seen it too. I don't know if that was an alien, UFO, or what, but it was a weird experience. When I was younger, I want to say in 4th or 5th grade, one of my friends disappeared from school for a while. It's much more complicated than that. It was around the fall time, and the next thing I know, I'm not seeing him in school anymore. After a couple of weeks, I decided to go to his house, and I remember the police being there. His parents looked extremely distressed, and I honestly thought he died. Being a kid, I didn't pursue anything and just went off with life. Teachers and classmates wouldn't talk about it. I guess it turns out he just went missing. No one knew what happened to him. Life just went on. I never went and revisited his house after that. I remember spring and summer came back around, and it was almost time for summer break. I remember going to school and seeing him there and freaking out. Everybody was. We all had so many questions for him, but the teachers strongly discouraged us from asking anything, asking us and pleading us to be sensitive, and we tried to continue on class and school as much as usual. It wasn't until after school that I remember walking home with him, asking him what was going on, where he had been for the past school year. He got reticent and said he didn't want to talk about it. I let it go after that. It wasn't until years later in high school he finally opened up and told me just what happened to him. He prefaced and said to me that I wouldn't believe a word he said, but I convinced him I would. He went on to tell me how one night he remembers waking up in a strange white room. He said it had a weird glow to it. He said these peculiar looking men kept him in this room and observed him like an animal almost. He told me how scared he was, but that only a few hours had passed, he thought. He said merely there were several times in this room that these strange multicolored lights would scan over him. He didn't know what was going on. He said the next thing he remembered after this was him waking back up in his bed in the same clothes he disappeared in. It had been 7 months, and his parents were convinced he died or was kidnapped, trafficked, etc. He said police were now involved, and he had to recount his story. His parents weren't sure what to make of it, and the police were baffled. He doesn't honestly know where he was taken to, or who took him. And he's not a believer in paranormal or UFO stuff, so he doesn't even know how to explain it himself. We're long out of college now, and he lives a pretty normal life, but to this day, I'll always be convinced that he was taken by a UFO and held captive. Late one night when I was driving home from work, I experienced what I can only describe as a UFO. I've never had any previous encounters with the unknown, paranormal, or anything out of the ordinary. Where I live is about 30 miles off of a main highway out in the middle of nowhere. To get to my work, I have to drive about 45 minutes plus just to get to the main highway, and then a ways out a little bit further. I work at a small retail store, and so I was closing that night. I usually get off around 9:30, so it was around 10 when this happened. This occurred in March of last year. I was making my way back up to the long road to my house, and at one point or another, I remember looking outside my passenger side window and noticing this oddly shaped light in the sky. I just assumed it was a plane, but thought it was strange because where I live, there's never any planes or any of that around here. It was moving so slowly, almost like it was stationary. I thought that was strange, so as I'm driving, I kept looking over at it. It was looking like it was gliding slowly across the night sky. I tried to look and see if I could make out a shape or a silhouette of a plane, but could not. At one point or another, this thing immediately takes off at the speed I've never seen a plane ever fly. I remember thinking to myself, did I just see a UFO? There's no way. After letting this soak in a little, I came to the realization that it was indeed some sort of UFO. This event took place in 2005. It's bothered me ever since the day it happened. I worked at the time doing design for a small graphic design firm. This night, I was working late to finish a project I had to get done for the next day. I had a strict deadline for the project. I was good friends with the owner of the company, so he never really cared how late I worked till. I remember it was about midnight or so when I was leaving work, luckily with my design project in the bag and ready for the following day. It was pissing raining outside. I mean, just pouring down. About halfway home, the rain stops and I was able to see a little more clearly. As I'm pulling into my neighborhood, which, might I add, is very well lit with streetlights and such, I see this strange floating object in the air. I'd say about 200 plus feet up. It looked like this bizarre looking black cube structure. I have no other way to describe it. It was rather large and just floating perfectly still in one spot. It was hovering. It looked like it had weird designs etched into it, like it was made out of obsidian or something like that. It looked like stone, but was partially reflective. It looked like it was carved out of something natural. I actually stopped my car just so I could stick my head out of the driver's window to look at it. I'm staring up at it, thinking, what the fuck? Then it starts spinning rapidly, and then takes off super fast and vanishes. I couldn't believe my eyes. It never once made a sound or emitted any sort of light. Where I was in my neighborhood at the time, it was after midnight, and it was pretty close to dead silent. No other traffic, no dogs barking, nothing. This thing didn't even make a sound. I sat there in the middle of the road with my head still out the window, just trying to piece together what I had just seen. I can't stop thinking about what I'd seen. I wasn't sure who to tell, or even who to talk to. I haven't really told anyone about it personally just due to not wanting to face ridicule or disbelief. I have a pretty good job and I don't want to risk anything going down the shitter. I've been looking into the black cube phenomenon before though, and could only find some things here and there. What do you all know about it? A few close friends of mine and I saw this weird orb-shaped object just a few miles south of San Diego, along the coastline. It was a shiny, black-looking orb. This was back in 2015. I've been looking into this, and I can't find a whole lot on what we saw. It was this large, what we can only describe as an orb. It wasn't emitting any light. It almost looked like it was made entirely of black marble. It was glossy looking, with weird patterns running all along it. I know this kind of thing isn't as common to see, but I don't know what else to say about what we all saw. It was just hovering out there above the water. It looked pretty large and like it was off the coast just a ways. It stayed stationary, so I'm sure others happened to see it too, since it was during the day.